Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Today is October the 3rd, 2017. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. You know, Tony Bellew has been running off at the mouth. This is boxing. It happens, right? And now he wants you to believe that Joseph Parker is a very average heavyweight and that Bellew himself would easily defeat Joseph Parker for the heavyweight championship. I don't know about you, but I love it when the world's upside down. I love it when you see guys fight, you realize one guy is vastly underrated, and everyone is going to spend their time telling you that that guy is going to lose big bouts. It might surprise some people, but there was a time when people thought that about Muhammad Ali, right? Sonny Banks drops Ali. Of course, Ali goes on to be one of history's best heavyweights. We used to hear that all the time about Olympic bronze medal winner Floyd Mayweather. I'm just telling you, at the heavyweight division, Tony Bellew is not the athlete. 34-year-old Tony Bellew isn't close to the athlete Joseph Parker is. Let me point out, too, that Parker's interesting because as you watch a Parker fight, there are Parker fights where he looks like he just can't kick it in a fourth gear. That Andy Ruiz fight, I'm still disturbed by, right? That was a title fight, and you didn't get any feeling of urgency from Joseph Parker. The Carlos Takam fight, quite frankly, I thought he lost the bout. But let's realize that Hughie Fury has vastly better footwork. I mean vastly better footwork than Tony Bellew. Right? Vastly better. That was a very tough style matchup for Joseph Parker. Let's also give Parker credit for his punching power. When Parker steps on the gas, folks, he stops guys. You could tell he hits with suddenness. You could tell the other guy's badly hurt before he hits the canvas. Given a punching contest between Joseph Parker and Tony Bellew, it's not close. I consider Parker to have one of the better punches at heavyweight. I consider Tony to be, in fact, he considers himself to be a fat cruiserweight. Right? So Tony, you know, let me say this too. Parker moves better than you think. Now, it might not have looked that way against Hughie Fury because Fury's forte is footwork, right? But understand, Tony has been beaten by guys who move at least twice in the past. Nathan Cleverly beats Tony, right? It was a close fight, but Cleverly beats Tony the first time. And Cleverly was a guy who, you know, moves a bit in that fight. Right? Adonis Stevenson, one of the parts of Stevenson's game that's underappreciated is the fact that he jumps around, hides behind a jab before he throws that big left hand. Right? Stevenson against Bellew is moving, and Bellew, of course, is a little bit puzzled by it. If Joseph Parker wanted, Joseph Parker could move against Bellew. Understand, Parker does a lot of things very well. Parker could move against Bellew, come in, be sudden, hit Bellew with heavyweight punches. Let's just say, if the Haye fight falls apart, and let's face it, even fans of David Haye know that a lot of Haye fights have fallen apart before they've happened in the past, right? Let's just keep it real here. If the David Haye fight falls apart, and if Tony decides that he wants to fight for the heavyweight title, look, Joseph Parker already defended the title in the United Kingdom. Right? I don't believe Joseph Parker would hesitate to fight Tony Bellew in the United Kingdom. Unless Parker's Achilles suddenly snaps in the middle of that bout, I would expect Parker to treat Bellew like Adonis Stevenson did at a much lower weight. One man's opinion. Let's talk about an interesting fight coming up. Unbeaten Jarrett Hurd who I think is special, so you know where I'm going in this video, against Austin Trout. Now let me say this, Hurd is taller than Trout by about 3 inches. You would think that Trout, a southpaw, would look at all that body on Hurd and would say, okay, I'm going to come in from the southpaw side of the aisle here. Going to try to confuse the kid with angles. I'm going to be throwing wicked hooks to this guy's body because there's too much of it. How's a guy this tall, how's a 6'1" guy fighting at this weight class? Right? If I'm Trout, I'm coming in, I'm forcing the issue, I'm not being overly defensive, I'm being offensive, I'm punishing a tall guy for dehydrating himself to make a lighter weight. But you and I know that's not Trout's game, right? Trout rarely goes to the body. Trout is really a jabber, isn't he? Right? Doesn't Trout, in fact, need room to operate? Let's also say this too. Trout is kind of like a reverse Canelo. Let's be critical of boxing a little bit. You look at a Canelo fight, you think to yourself, oh, that's close. Let's face it, we can punch in several names. Right? Trout, Erislandy Lara, Miguel Cotto. Right? Then they announced the scoring, and one judge always has it far too wide. Right? Just like in the Golovkin fight. And then you're hearing the other scores, and they're too wide as well. And you're thinking to yourself, okay, watching this fight on TV, I must be missing some dynamic that's taking, place in the arena. Because clearly Canelo didn't outland the guy, right? Didn't really do enough to win the fight. Well, with Trout, it's the opposite. With Trout, for some odd reason, you look at Trout fights where, take the Jamal Charlo fight. You look at that fight and you're thinking, oh, this is a close fight. You're like, oh man, what? You're thinking to yourself, whoa, I could see a judge conceivably giving this fight to Austin Trout, right? Then they give you the scoring and you're baffled, right? The cards are wide. You're wondering what fight the judges saw. You know what? It was like that when Trout fought Canelo. In fact, I thought Trout won that fight. You knew he hadn't because that was a fight fought under that idiotic system where they announced the scores every 4 rounds. So as you were watching the fight, you understood that the crazy judges of the world were out there scoring the fight in a way that didn't really reflect what you were watching. Right? One man's opinion didn't reflect what I was watching. I'm just giving my opinion here, right? I don't know any of the judges personally. I use the word crazy as, an opinion adjective. Okay, we'll just put it that way. Well, let's just say with Trout, for some reason, his game doesn't register fully on the judges' scorecards. And that's something that we as gamblers have to consider. Right? His style, for whatever reason, isn't as judge-friendly as it should be. Even the scores in his win over Miguel Cotto should have been wider, in my opinion, than they were on the judges' scorecards. At least 2 of the 3 judges' scorecards. Now, let me say this about Hurd. Hurd's a tall guy, but my goodness, this guy knows how to hide his body. What I like with Hurd, too, is he's a thinking man's fighter. He lures people in. He gets people to try to throw at his body. Then he's able to cover up and he's able to come back with great counters. Right? This is a guy who can be in the pocket and out of the pocket at the same time. He's a young guy, but he fights like a vet. In other words, he's in the pocket, but he's leaning. Right? When I say hide his body, I mean guys are coming and he's bent intuitively, knows how to bend his body, knows how to give you shoulders as opposed to leaving it exposed, right? His timing is excellent. Quite frankly, he's one of the sports more underrated fighters, in my opinion. Right? So I'm expecting Trout to be a basic opponent for him. In other words, I think he's going to look at Trout. He's going to see a guy who's primarily a jabber and a head hunter. And he's going to figure out how to neutralize that southpaw jab. Right? Let's just say Trout doesn't really have a lot of plan Bs and plan Cs. At least not to these eyes. So once he neutralizes Trout's jab, I believe then he's going to, in the middle rounds, get on his front foot and start to smother Trout in a way that, quite frankly, Jamal Charlo wasn't able to, because Hurd can take what I call the extra step. In other words, there's some guys who will get close to you. There are other guys who will get closer to you and will actually lean on you. Right? This guy, to me, let's just say every Hurd fight I've watched, he starts the fight on third base. He knows his opponent. He knows exactly how he's going to deal with the opponent. He has a long game, so the opponent might have some moments early. But by the time you get to the middle of the fight, you notice that Hurd has the upper hand. Keep an eye on this young guy. He might be the best in the division. Put another way, I'm not sure if I would take Saul Alvarez over Jarrett Hurd if Hurd's body fills out and he goes up to 160. I like Jarrett Hurd in this fight over the better known Austin Trout, just like I like Joseph Parker, who fighters are dissing for some reason, over Tony Bellew. Let me just add this too. Full mea culpa. I took David Haye against Tony. Right? I believe for the first fight, I expected David Haye to win. Right? I did say that for Tony to win, it'd have to be by KO or something like that. So the hedge held. But just know I personally expected David Haye to win that fight. Now, David Haye's Achilles apparently was bothering him before the fight. There were reports. I know David Haye's not going to talk about it too much. He's not a guy to give a lot of excuses after talking about his toe against Vladimir Klitschko. Let me say this. I myself have had an Achilles injury, and I still feel it more than 15 years later. I'm not kidding. You always have to pay attention to the injuries. In my opinion, prime David Haye beats prime Tony Bellew. Right? I think Haye is the more talented fighter. Faster hands, heavier punch. Right? Can fight from distance. But that's a fight, in my opinion, where you need to be on the sidelines, because that fight really comes down to whether or not David Haye is still prime David Haye. In other words, how much has the injury taken out of him? I'm always hesitant to take a fighter after the guy has had the kind of injury that impacts his boxing skills. You saw that David Haye was practically on one leg against Tony Bellew. You saw Haye get knocked out of the ring against Bellew. Right? That's how bad his balance was. He couldn't use the leg. Now, the reason David Haye continued to fight on is because he and Bellew have a history. And it's clear to me from that history, David Haye felt that Bellew didn't hit hard enough, right? David Haye is coming in on Bellew like Floyd Mayweather came in on Conor McGregor, right? And David Haye on one leg thought he still had a shot on Tony Bellew. Let's just say I wouldn't expect David Haye on one leg to try to continue to fight against Anthony Joshua. But yet, here was David Haye on one leg trying to fight against Tony, right? Because of the injury, because I personally feel that Achilles injuries are some of the worst injuries that a slugger can have, because sluggers use their legs for leverage, right? I'm going to be on the sidelines for that David Haye-Tony fight. But if that fight doesn't happen and Tony looks for a dance partner, and ends up picking Joseph Parker, I'll be all over the Joseph Parker side of the play. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.